Rahim. Um, Today's webinar will consist of an introduction to the topic and then a brief look into the definition of the intellect itself and what the Islamic perspective of it is. And then we'll move on to the application of the role of the intellect within Islam and for Muslims, and how the scholars in the past have talked about this issue when it comes to revelation and the intellect and understanding the Quran and the Hadith primarily, inshallah ta'ala. Of course, the intellect has roles everywhere in life, especially in terms of theology and beliefs and so forth. That is something we may touch upon as well, very briefly, or relate to, inshallah ta'ala. So to start off with, the intellect in Arabic and the terminology used within the Quran, the Hadith, and the wordings of the ulama, the scholars of Islam, is al-aql. Ain, qaf, lam. Aqala, ya'qilu, and aqlun, which is the intellect, the rationale, the medium of thinking that a human being can use to reach new information and discover the unknown. And in this regard, just a few linguistical points before we move into the actual definition. The word aql and aqala in Arabic itself has a meaning of restraint or tying down. The iqal is what a camel is tied with. In a famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, when a man came from Arabia somewhere, from the desert, and he arrived at the Masjid of the Prophet ﷺ, and he came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, I left my camel outside. Should I tie the camel and trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or should I leave it and trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? The Prophet ﷺ said, I'qil wa tawakkal. I'qil, this very word. So what is the relationship between tying down, restraining, holding back, and the intellect or the way of thinking when it comes to this, etymological root or connection of the word? This is something we'll touch upon later actually itself. As Imam al-Ghazali mentions, it is the restraining of one's actions, of one's behavior, when you realize, when you understand the correct code of conduct, when you understand it's not befitting to do such and such a thing. We call somebody who does that in Arabic aqil. He's aqil, he's got aql, he's got understanding, he's got, in a sense, wisdom, in a sense, common sense, in a sense, right? That's what it is. So this is what it's used for in that context, within the linguistical context. In terms of the actual definition of the aql itself, through the research that I did, there is no real definition, or the quiddity of the aql, the quiddity of the intellect, as we'll refer to it from now on, or the reality of the intellect itself, is not something that is discernible or has been defined and in a definitive, clear way amongst anybody really. It's just something that is more understood through its application. So the power of the intellect, the use of the intellect, the role of the intellect is really where definitions lead to, in a sense. You won't really find the aql is this and then it does this. You'll find a kind of the aql does this kind of straight away understanding or definition given to the aql, or the intellect as we're going to call it. The first scholar that I'll mention who talked about the intellect is al-Imam Harith ibn Asad al-Muhasibi rahimahullah ta'ala, one of the earliest scholars of the Islamic sciences and theology in particular. He passed away in 243 AH, rahimahullah ta'ala. He was a prolific writer. He wrote many books, short works and some lengthier works. He was, I firmly believe, a big inspiration for the likes of Imam al-Ghazali, who often quote him and his works throughout. Imam Ghazali, his works, Imam Muhasibi is oft quoted. So he has a book actually called Al-Aqlu wa Fahmul Quran, the intellect and understanding the Quran. And to take parts of that book out and to talk about the Aql itself, he mentions that the Aql is a ghariza, which means like an innate characteristic, something built within us. Ghuriza fina, it's been placed within us. We have this faculty it's a ghariza, it's a faculty or an innate character, innate ability. Then he says al-aqlu fahmun, aql, intellect, is understanding. So again, this is something that is the result of having the intellect. And then he says the third thing, al-aqlu basiratun, that the intellect is insight. Again, what you use it for more than what it is itself. So the actual reality, quality of aql we can't really get to, or we hasn't really been described by the ulama, but more so the role of the intellect. And he says in his book that the aql, the intellect, is a gharizatun ja'alaha Allahu, which Allah has placed or made fil mumtahanina min ibadihi, in those slaves that have the ability to or in a sense, mumtahanina means literally examined, or people who have imtihan or taklif, or who are responsible, capable, understanding in a sense. Allah has placed this within them. Allah has placed within them. He also says that the Arabs call the aql fahm, they call the intellect understanding, because what you understand is what your intellect has tied down or brought into your mind, into your understanding. And not only that, you've actually, when you tie something down, you make it firm, or you regulate it in a sense. It's understood, it's regulated, it's there. And so what you understand is firm and clear with you. What you don't understand is always out there. I'm not sure what it is. It's back and forth, goes over your head, as they say. It doesn't settle. So what settles and is firm is what is understanding, and that's what the aql does. So again, the role of the application of the aql. And then in terms of the basira, which means insight, so you have basar, which is outside, and you have basira, which is insight. He says that basira comes after the fahm. So he doesn't actually say that the aql is basira in the same sense as the fahm, but what he says is that the aql, the intellect and the understanding lead to a deeper insight into affairs. This maybe we could relate back to the science of logic here and say that you process known information to reach unknown information. So the majhulat, which are unknown things, are attained and become ma'lumat through the ma'lumat. Example, when we learn universals, when we know that fire burns, and that's an experience, that's a reality that's established within us. When we see a fire, a new fire, we know that this fire will also burn. When we know that heat warms us up, has an effect, and how to produce heat, then we'll be able to produce heat from different sources and different things. So things we are not aware of we become aware of through the process of knowing things and understanding things, which comes from the aql itself, the intellect itself, but leads to further learning. And then obviously the role here on logic and the study, it leads us to theoretical knowledge, not just tangible things, but also maths is a good example of that, in terms of you got an equation, then that can be applied to many situations that are theoretical but could have a practical application in the future, or could actually be parameters we don't want to reach because of safety, because of dangers and risks, etc. So this is the idea of the intellect. It's a tool for us to reach the unknown through what we already know. And of course the primary source of knowledge, of knowing, is the senses is what is within us primarily, and in a sense that is the intellect itself. The intellect, the discernibility, the discrimination between things and right and wrong, or something that all things that come through the intellect. And just to mention some other scholars and what they said about the intellect as well. Imam al-Juwayni, great Imam, Imam al-Haramain, Abdul Malik ibn Yusuf al-Juwayni rahimahullah ta'ala, the teacher of Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala. He was known as the Imam of the Makkah and Medina Haramain. He was a great scholar of his time, especially in the intellectual sciences, the ma'qulat, and also in the Shafi'i fiqh school, and the usul al-fiqh as well. He's known for his works in these subjects. He says in his Burhan, his book called Al-Burhan, when he actually talks about the aql, the intellect directly, and he says that the aql is a gharizatun. So he uses the same wording as Imam al-Muhasibi before him, and he actually recognizes that Imam al-Hasimi is really the only one that's mentioned something before him. And Imam al-Juwayni passed away in the 5th century AH, so he's a couple of hundred years now after Imam al-Muhasibi. So he says غريزة يتأتى بها درك العلوم وليست منها. So it's a غريزة, it's this faculty, this ability, this character placed inside of us through which we ascertain and perceive the ulum, the sciences, the knowledge in general. وَلَيْسَتْ مِنْهَا, but it's not from the sciences. It's not the same, one and the same thing. So again, the great Imam doesn't tell you what the intellect is, tells you the role of the intellect and what it's there for. And then he also says, it's a sifatun, so this characteristic, إِذَا ثَبَتَ بِهَا التَّوَسُّلُ إِلَى الْعُلُومِ النَّظَرِيَّةِ, when through it we can establish and reach tawassul, we can reach the theoretical knowledges, sciences, and so forth. But how do we do that? وَمُقَدَّمَاتُهَا مِنَ الضَّرُورِيَّاتِ. It's initial, so the initial knowledge we get has to be from the daruriyat, the necessities. These are again the basic way of learning, as any child picks up, any child learns, etc., etc. This is basically our senses and how we process basic information. 1 + 1 = 2 when children grow up. This is what we all learn. These are the necessities that we all learn by and are discussed and so forth within the basic books of psychology as well as logic. And then he says, well, here mustanadun nadariyat, the source of the nadariyat, the theoretical and the more sort of deeper knowledge and insight comes from these original foundational necessities that every Muslim or every human being has within him or herself, and that's the real goal of the intellect, is to use your experience, your life, your intellect, which is your experience, your life, and the sort of the information, let's say the data that's been collected within your lifetime, your experiences, your brain has processed, and then to further process that information using the tool of the intellect, the tool of the faculty of rationale, aql in Arabic, as we said, to produce or to reach further knowledge and discover life and discover many metaphysical realities and so forth, right? And just go beyond what we just know and what we can just see and feel. We actually derive sound derivations of understandings of life, of knowledge. And this is what people have sought to do from the very beginning. Philosophy comes into this, and religion and revelation and processing all of that is the first step, if you like. And this brings us to an important point, actually. Before we mention the four, and I want to mention Imam Ghazali's 4 definitions of the, or 4 meanings actually of the aql, the intellect. This brings us on to a very important question, that we have our intellect and rationale and sort of logical way of thinking, and then we also have the revelation, and the Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad, the reports from the Prophet ﷺ and even from previous prophets and their revelation and the sacred texts. which one of the two takes precedence, or trumps the other in effect, right? Which one is higher in rank and greater in status, that it regulates the other one. So is the aql above and beyond intellect and rational, above and beyond revelation, and therefore revelation has to fit in to the framework of rationale, or is revelation greater than our intellect? So intellect is a human thing, it's within a human being, it's not within other creatures, right? And therefore, because as believers, let's speak from a Muslim perspective in this regard, because that's divine, and because that's of a greater reality or surety in a sense, it's from God Almighty, there's no doubt in it, the revelation. Does that then take precedence and control and dictate the aql itself, which is actually a very linear, clear-cut way of thinking? Can that contradict, or what if there's a contradiction? Basically, that's the question. Who wins? And so this is a very crucial question that we will hopefully answer today, inshallah ta'ala. So it's one of the things that we need to really reflect upon and think about during today's discussion, inshallah ta'ala. So moving on to Imam al-Ghazali's definition, or actually explanation of the meanings of aql and what that means itself. So in this regard, I'm going to quote from Imam al-Ghazali when he writes in book 1 of Ihya al-Ulumuddin. So the very beginning of Ihya al-Ulumuddin, book 1 is the book of knowledge, and he has other works talking about the aql, but in book 1 he actually mentions, he has a chapter on the aql, elucidation of the real nature of the intellect and its categories. And he says the first meaning of the aql, and he talks about the aql in 4 different meanings or applications. Again, these are going to be applications and what the intellect is used for. Actually means at the very beginning, says, know that I'm reading from a translation here by Kenneth Honekamp, published by Fons Vitae. Says, know that people have differed among themselves on both the definition and true nature of the intellect. The majority have ignored the fact that this term has been applied to a broad array of divergent meanings. This is the reason for their divergent opinions. The truth that lifts the veil on this matter is that the word intellect is a term that is used interchangeably in relation to 4 different meanings. So this is what they call in Arabic, according to Imam Ghazali's opinion, is lafdhun mushtarak, which means is a word that could be applied to many different meanings. The same word can apply to, an example of this in Arabic at least is the word ayn. The word ayn can mean the eye, it can mean a spring of water, a fountain. Ayn al-shay is like the shams, the sun, the ayn of the shams. This is how it can be applied. Ayn can be used metaphorically for a spy, right, for a jasus. So this one word can be applied in different ways. So it's called lafdhul mushtarak in Arabic and usul and in language. So I'm just going to mention the 4 different meanings of intellect as per Imam al-Ghazali in his Ihya al-Ulumuddin book 1. I have the Arabic with me as well. He says, al-aqlu yutlaqu ala arbati ma'anin. The word aql, intellect, is said for, or has been given and used for 4 different meanings. فالأول الوصف الذي يفارق الإنسان به سائر البهائم. Number 1, it is the attribute that differentiates human beings from all other animals. وهو الذي استعد به لقبول العلوم النظرية. And by this, i.e. the aql, he says, and affords humans the ability to apprehend the speculative sciences, the theoretical knowledge, and to organize the subtle rational disciplines. And here he says, وهو الذي أراده الحارث بن أسد المحاسبي حيث قال في حد الأقل إنها غريزة يتهيأ بها إدراك العلوم النظرية. And it is the one that Imam al-Harith ibn Asad al-Muhasibi intended, this meaning of the intellect, when he said it is a faculty, it is an innate characteristic that prepares an individual, the person who has the intellect, to perceive and understand al-ulum al-nadhariya, the speculative sciences as translated here, or theoretical knowledge in simple terms, and derive more from what we already know And this is the process of thinking in Islam, intellect, that we have. And the second one, we're going to jump, not going to read everything, but the second one is the second meaning of aql is هي العلوم التي تخرج إلى الوجود في ذات الطفل المميز. So this is a form of intellect or discernment, as we mentioned earlier. So it says here, it is the science that comes, or types of knowledge that come into being in the disposition of a child. It discerns the possibility of possible occurrences and the impossibility of the possible. Right? So this is when we start thinking 1 + 1 = 2. Right? Somebody tells you 1 + 1 = 3. Even as a child, you're like, no. One sweet and another sweet has these, even though you don't know maybe what 2 even means. But you know it means 2 objects. You can see 2 things. Later on, you find out it's 2 or or ithnain or whatever language, do, etc. Whatever language, right? French, English, Arabic. A number is placed with that reality, but the reality is the reality. The discernment is there. A child knows you got a sweet and you got another sweet. There's 2 of them. The word 2 is later language, but the reality is that there's 2 things. And a child cannot be fooled, and we cannot be fooled, to think that if you're going to be given 2 sweets, it's 3. Or if you add 2 together, 1 and 1 together, it equals anything other than 2. So this discernment, this ability to recognize this being a requirement, 1 + 1 = 3 is a requirement and is a reality, and anything else is impossible, is what a child picks up at that young age of 6, 7, 8 onwards, probably earlier than that in terms of numbers. But as we grow, as children, as adults, and as intellectuals and thinkers, and the more we use the faculty, the more it becomes stronger like a muscle, and the more we can process, and the more we can come to know. The example here that he gives is actually that 2 is bigger than 1. Right? We know 2 is greater than 1. Number 3, the third meaning of the aql, the intellect, is علوم تستفاد من التجارب بمجاري الأحوال. So it's basically it says علوم really means sciences, knowledges, but it really means experiences that or understandings from experiences that are, it says here, derived through the observation of events and circumstances as they arise, and your experiences, tajarib. For a person who has become worldly through a variety of experience, worldly as in experience in the world, through a variety of experiences and disciplined by the many paths he has journeyed upon, is generally said to be a person of intellect. Somebody who has understanding of wisdom, as I mentioned earlier. He's aqil, he's got understanding, he's got wisdom, he's got intellect, right? So he knows what's going on around him. And the fourth meaning that Imam al-Ghazali purports and puts forward for the intellect, and he actually goes back to a little bit of a definition, but really again an application, is it says أن تنتهي قوة. So this ability, this innate characteristic and faculty we have has got a quwwah, has got a strength, an ability. It's got strength and ability. By which, it says here, the fourth applies when the faculty of the innate inclination results in the capacity to discern the consequences of one's action. تنتهي قوة هذه الغريزة إلى أن يعرف عواقب الأمور. So the power of this ability, of this faculty, its quwwah, its strength, allows one to understand, to discern, to have ma'rifah of عواقب الأمور, the consequences, the repercussions of everything. So again, related to the previous one slightly of, wisdom teaches you, but even after wisdom's taught you, the intellect further develops to give you further insight for future planning, for tadbir al-umur, when you want to plan your affairs. So then you'll refrain from doing certain things, which we mentioned earlier. This sort of aql has that meaning within the language of holding you back. And that's what Imam actually goes on to say. He says, for example, it is the ability to control and overcome the desires that motivate one to seek immediate gratification. So if you have aql or rational or thinking, or you're a person of intellect, you don't just satisfy yourself and gratify yourself instantly, which is the world we live in today, really, in the fast-paced world we live in. It's all about self-gratification and speedy things, right? So we need to avoid that. We need to stay away from that, really, and protect ourselves. And people of intellect, as mentioned here by Imam, al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala. So that's what Imam al-Ghazali says with regard to the human intellect and its roles and its meaning. So the word he says has four applications, as described in his Ihya Ulum ad-Din, and in the translation by Kenneth Honerkamp. It's on page 253 onwards. It's one of the last sections of the Book of Knowledge. In fact, it might be the last. Actually, it's the very last section on the Book of Knowledge, which is the nature of the intellect and its categories, its meanings, which Imam Ghazali then explains. Just to mention one other scholar, Ibn Jawzi al-Hanbali rahimahullah ta'ala, the great Hanbali scholar of Baghdad, he says, يعرف العقل بسكوته وسكونه ومراقبته للأواقب وليس العقل محسوسا وإنما يدل عليه ظاهر قول العاقل وعمله. So again, application. So he says, first of all, to start from the end, the intellect is not something which is tangible. It's not mahsus. It's not a physical, tangible element of our being. But what indicates to it is the actions of the aqil, of the intellectual person, of the person of intellect, and his speech. And then, going back to the beginning, it says, by the aql and its sukut and its sukoon, meaning it's being still and serene, and its awareness of the outcomes of things. Again, he kind of mentioned the same thing. Muraqabati lil awaqib. It's through its processing, basically, of experiences and things that occur to us, the aql then gets to, it knows, it learns through these processes, right? يعرف العقل بسكوته وسكونه ومراقبته للأواقب. So this is what the aql does. Again, an application of what the intellect does. And the reason why I mentioned these few scholars is because to show you that the scholars in the past have talked about this subject and have talked about the aql, and there are books written directly about this topic. And there's other scholars like the famous Abu Bakr al-Razi, the Tabib al-Razi as he's known, talks about the aql in terms of a more of a physiological and medicinal kind of angle, because he was a doctor, he was a physician. And other scholars have talked about the aql and its role and so forth. But it really comes back to this idea of it's a faculty that is used to process information and to reach greater knowledge and greater understanding of life and why we're here and so forth. So that's basically the foundation of the aql itself. Now we will move on to the application of aql when it comes to revelation and the sacred sciences, and answer this question now of what is the role of the aql and the rank of the aql, in a sense, of the intellect and the intellect and the revelation. So who wins? Who how does it work, basically? What's the relationship rather than who wins? And on this point, some people, just because a hadith doesn't make sense to them, right? I'll mention it at this point before we go into it. Just because it doesn't make sense to you or me or anybody else, they reject it. Now, that's very unacademic, by the way, right? Because your brain can't comprehend, you reject, very unacademic, right? Some of the most profound aspects of our life, right, are unexplainable through rationale, through scientific, intellectual means. Just like, people, some people look at a painting and think it's beautiful and pay millions of pounds for it. Come on, it's just scribbles on a piece of paper. Millions of pounds, no, you got to appreciate it. Right, are you stupid? Are you, no offense to anyone, but that's how some people react. So similarly, if we can't understand a statement, just because your mind can't process it, similarly, like just, you can't process why people pay millions of pounds for these paintings and, canvases and whatever, right? And they are worth millions of pounds out there. People have given them that value through the intellect, through their reading, understanding of lines, colors. This is an example. Aesthetics. We can't. How does it work? I don't get it. Yeah, you don't get it because your mind doesn't get it. Can't reject it. Can't say it's not a reality. It's just a fad. No, there's something there that I haven't got access to. You know, the taste of music. Like it's just bang, 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 bang. But we all can pick a remedy, or a rhythm up, and a tune and a melody, right? But you like different ones. You got your tastes, and so this human intellect has its limits and has its, and everyone's limited in different ways, as well. So just to mention that before we go on to the role of the intellect within Islamic sciences, let's say, and how it works. So first of all, one of the applications of the intellect and Islamic sciences, and in fact the root of it actually, and where we should start from, is the concept of accepting the revelation itself, and why we have to accept revelation, why we should accept, or just accept something's a statement that was said, rather than call it revelation for now. How do we know something was said? We have a concept in usul al-fiqh and in hadith as well, as part of both really, of mutawatir. And the word mutawatir, for those of you who know, refers to a concurrent narration or a mass narration of a saying or incident or event or person existing or place existing, etc., etc., right? It's something that in the definition it says tuhilul aql, yuhilul aqlu, or tuhilul adatu, right? In normal affairs, is like the aql, the intellect, rejects that this could be a lie, that this report that's come through these mass narrations, these people don't know each other, there's no collusion, there's no signs of anything that could have this have been made up. So if somebody says to you Australia exists, I accept it, right? You all accept it. Look, I've never been there, I've never seen Australia, I've met Australians, right? That's a sign. I've heard people talk about Australia. I've seen videos now. Today we live in a video world, but in the past there was no videos, right? But people are saying that we're from this country, we're from this country. Like, it's like, wow, I don't know where Australia is, right? But it must exist because everybody's saying they're from there, right? Now, all these people I've met in my life that say they're from Australia, or there's this place called Australia, am I going to doubt them and say, no, I'm going to see for myself with my own eyes? No. In Islam, we are taught those reports, whether they're religious or not, by the way, like I said, we take religion out of it for the moment, reports of any such nature that come from any angle about any topic, we are taught within our framework of Islamic sciences that we must accept it, and it has to be there has to be a solid how can we build a life and live if we can't have these principles, right? These essentials we talked about earlier. One of those is to accept what's being brought to you by a reliable source, especially by a mass of people who are reliable and bringing you the same reports, same understanding, same information, same words, same narrations of the incidents that occurred or the things that exist in places you haven't been, seen, or heard, right? You haven't been there, you haven't heard there, you haven't seen anything. So this is very, very important. So the case of mutawatir, both in usul al-fiqh and usul al-hadith, the aql comes into it, and it tells us to establish an acceptance of the reports of revelation, therefore, right? So let's take it to revelation now. So if the Sahaba, companions of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they relate something to us that's being passed on to a mass number of a large amount of people, who then relate it on to the further generations until it becomes so profuse that numbers don't even become an issue, right? They're in now thousands and hundreds and millions now, right? So it's not numbers not an issue now. But yeah, at the very beginning, what was it like? There were numbers. There was 7, 5, 3, 20, 70 in some cases, right? If so many people are saying this happened, so many people are saying this I heard, so many people are then passing that on to so many people, like we said, it's rationally very, 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 very unlikely, and therefore we reject that these could be made up things, that these could be conjectures. They just, we're not too sure, we're thinking about accepting it, it's 80% there. No, these are 100% what is being done and reported to us, right? So for this reason, we believe Jesus exists, because it's never been in denial. We believe the Prophet Muhammad existed, and the fact that there's a grave in Medina and people have been visiting it for the last 1400 years without stop and fail is enough of a proof that these people existed in the first place. But we also have statements from them. We also have, and to put it from a general perspective, a claim of revelation from them. There's another step we have to go through before we accept revelation. As Muslims we do, not everyone will, but there should be no denying that this book called the Quran, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has said, is from Allah. There's no doubt that the book was with him. The words were with him. They were conveyed to somebody else. Now, whether you then follow on and say, I accept that they're from God as well, as Muslims we will do that, but as a non-Muslim you may not. Even non-Muslims may believe the Quran is from God. It doesn't make him a Muslim necessarily. It's part of being a Muslim. But what it is essential to accept is that that document, or that narrative in the Quran is the oral narration first, oral tradition first, but was preserved and was in written form, soon after the Prophet ﷺ as well. And even that written form has been passed on through this whole concept of concurrent narration or concurrent reports and mass narrations, which then the intellect has to say, well, I can't deny that it's the actual one that was given the Prophet ﷺ to the companions, to the generations there until today. And like I said, we're in the millions now, and you've got a million of huffaz of the Quran, memorizers of the Quran and reciters, and they are reading the same exact Quran, not just word for word, not just letter for letter, vowel for vowel. And this, we're in the month of Ramadan, and if somebody makes a mistake in the voweling of the Quran, a pronunciation in the, instead of saying I don't know, kitaba, he says kitabu, kitaba, kitabu. The people who know the Quran, and there's many of them within the masajid, will recognize that the reciter has made a grammatical mistake on a vowel. Not a word has been changed for a word, that's easy to recognize. Not a word you missed out, a vowel has been pronounced incorrectly, it's been changed. Instead of saying kitabu, kitaba has been said. Right? So this is how how detailed the narration and the concurrent reports have given us the Quran, that today we have millions upon millions of people that have the same Quran as the time of the Prophet ﷺ. We shouldn't just think it's now. This is a whole chain that was at this level of preservation and concurrent amount and concurrent narrations, that just so many coming together. They're all concurrent. I'm using this term for that reason. There's just so many together. They just it's not possible to deny, right? So here's the thing. Now let's go back to that question. Logic, rationale has taught us to at least accept what has come from a person. Now, if he claims to be revelation, the next step now is to ascertain, the veracity and the truthfulness of that claim. Okay, so we believe all this is from you, all this from God, right? Okay, wow, right? Do we believe that? Do we want to accept that? What stage do we have to go through? Miracles. The prophets brought miracles, their truthfulness, and they said, if we can do things that you can't then imitate and you can't challenge us with, will you then accept what we have to offer? Will you accept, the fact that we are speaking on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And, that's what happened. They provided their miracles as an argument, as a hujjah, as a proof and a source of, acceptance that they are speaking on behalf of God Almighty. So it becomes revelation now. So we know that it's been said. And now we know you're speaking on behalf of God Almighty. Okay, the whole process of miracles and the proofs of the Prophet is a long topic, and logic and rationale does come into that as well. So again, another application of a rational approach to accepting, and this answers our question in a sense that it's rationale, it's intellect that first makes us. So yes, I would say it's irrational and illogical to reject once rationale and intellect has told us, look, we've got to accept this. We've got to say that it's revelation, it's from God Almighty, it's miraculous in its nature in the Quran, but also the miracles that were produced, and it's got such coherence. And so logic rationale tells us, right, it's revelation. And if you accept the part of it as revelation, we accept all of it as revelation. We can't say, yeah, we believe you that this part is revelation, but we won't accept this part because we don't like it. No, you got to accept the whole package. If the claim is it's all revelation and you logically have come to a conclusion, the miracles are there, it's beyond human ability to produce this, then yes, I'm going to take the leap of faith and I'm going to believe in this as revelation. So there's a role of the intellect at an early stage that comes into beliefs, but ultimately is the leap of faith and iman that you have to find and Allah puts in the hearts that takes us to a level of faith. Now, the question itself: what comes? Who dominates now? Is it the intellect? Because it's the intellect that got you there. Like we said, it's had a part and a role to play. Now, there was a leap of faith. Now you're in faith. You accept everything. Now, when you accept everything, there's things that you might not understand, things that you might think are a bit weird. Just like I said, don't just because you or my mind thinks it's weird. Is it outside of logic? That's what we've got to actually discuss. I'll give you one example. In Sahih al-Bukhari, there is a narration where the angel of death approaches the Prophet Musa alayhi salam, and it mentions that Musa alayhi salam strikes the angel of death, and I think the eye of the angel of death falls out. Right? Now, you might think, oh, what a fairy tale, superstitious kind of thing, right? Oh, that doesn't make sense. So that's just not acceptable. How could the prophets do that? Or an angel's eye falls out. Well, look, can an eye fall out? May Allah protect you, but I'm not seeing it in real life. I have seen video of somebody's eye come out after a blow, after an accident, right? It can happen, and can it be put back in and made well? Yeah, we have that. Logically, rationally, it's not impossible. That could have occurred. Literally, it could have occurred. Is it literal or not, and is it interpreted or not, is another question. But why would we reject that on an intellectual, rational basis? There's no reason to. There's no rationale to say it's got to be rejected because it's illogical. It's got to be rejected because it doesn't fit the framework of sound reasoning. That's not an option. And that's what I said to you. We need to be careful what we call intellect, what we call rationale. If you can't fathom that, or if you can't, let's say stomach that rather than fathom it, that's your personal taste and your relationship and sort of interaction with the text. Now, I don't have to have the same taste and approach as you. I'm going to be logical and say it's a possibility. The fact that I can be resurrected is a possibility. So now, do I have to believe in that? Do I have to accept it? Well, I'm a Muslim, so I accept it. I'm a believer in the afterlife, I accept it. I believe in angels, I believe in prophets, I believe that this could have been a physical reality. I can accept it. It's within the framework of acceptability rationally, right? So this is the role of the intellect. However, now, and this is where we have to understand that if the text, in fact, is outside of rationale, it can happen, right? And it doesn't fit the criteria of or the basic levels of sound knowledge, just the basic level of knowledge as in rationale, right? Intellectual, sound level thinking. Then yes, we have a major problem. We have a text, or supposedly we have a text of the Quran maybe, or the Islamic sciences. It doesn't exist in the Quran, so we can't really say that. In the Hadith it can, because not every statement is necessarily the Prophet's statement, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we will likely, let's stick to the Hadith on this. We then have a problem. Rationale is denying and rejecting something that supposedly is from our religion, a narration of the Prophet ﷺ, or a supposed narration of the Prophet ﷺ. So in this regard, let's see what the scholars said, and can we accept that or not, right? You can open the door if you want and enter into this reality and discuss this, inshallah ta'ala. And I'd like to quote some scholars and this very mas'ala itself. And the actual mas'ala or the actual discussion point here is accepting narrations if they are opposing or negating or in contradiction with what rationality dictates, basically. What is rationally the case? Because the aql, and this is important, we started with it, remember, it's your intellect that got you on this journey, that takes you on this journey, that is what you're using at every moment in time. So therefore, the intellect is always a tool that is a valid tool. It's not like, Islam doesn't say that this intellect is alien to Islam, get rid of it and just, just submit, full stop. No, your intellect helps you to submit, right? But when we get to a level of submission, khalas, whether you understand or not, as long as it's not irrational, you submit. Now, when it comes to irrationality, to this point, then we go back to that foundation. The intellect is a sound form of reasoning, of Islamic discernment, discrimination, intellectual basis of ascertaining the sciences, the knowledges, the unknown. And therefore, let's read out what the scholars said. So Imam Abu Bakr al-Jassas, who is a Hanafi scholar, who has books in Hanafi fiqh and on the Quran as well, he says, ومما يرد به أخبار الآحاد من العلل أن ينافي موجبات أحكام العقول. What rejects the ahad narrations and the defects that causes the rejection is a negation or a contradiction with the mujibat ahkam al-uqul, which basically means it contradicts rational thought. Because look what he says, لأن العقول, the intellects, are hujjatun, they are a proof, they are an argument, lillahi ta'ala, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وغير جائز انقلاب ما دلت عليه وأوجبته, and it's not possible, it's irrational for there to be an inqilab, a turning upside down of reality of what the aql, the rationale dictates, awjabat, brings about and indicates to. So this is telling you that one of the great Hanafi scholars of fiqh, he was not a scholar of aqidah or anything like that. He's said to be have other opinions in aqidah, but of fiqh, when it comes to usul and accepting narrations, this is the Hanafi perspective. Imam Abdul Qahir al-Baghdadi in his Usul ad-Din says from the conditions of accepting the reports is that the matan, the actual text of any khabar report, has to be mimma yajuzu fil aqli kawnuhu, that this text we have, what it's telling us, it has to be something rationally possible. فَإِنْ رَوَى الرَّاوِي, if a narrator narrates something ما يحيله الأقل, what the aql considers impossible, ولم يحتمل تأويلا صحيحا, this is an important point as well, and there's no sound interpretation, because it doesn't mean that if the text is literally impossible. Like I said, there are texts like this. So for instance, an example of the Quranic example of this is نَسُوا اللَّهَ فَأَنْسَاهُم, or in the Quran Allah says, and Allah forgot them. Allah nasiya, Allah forgot. Can Allah forget? No, that's irrational. That's not possible. That's inconceivable, right? Allah forgetting. But Allah says in the Quran, right? Allah says in the Quran, they forgot Allah, so Allah forgot them. Oh, wait a minute. It's not literal. It's metaphorical, right? So there's that's called interpretation, okay? So if there's an interpretation, fine. If there's no interpretation, valid, sound interpretation, as Imam says, then he says, فَخَبَرُهُ مَرْدُود, then that piece of narration is rejected. We don't accept it. So what we're doing here, we're giving the aql its role, really. We're not giving it priority, I would say. What we're giving it is its true role in the equation. And then, many of the scholars I mentioned here, Imam al-Samarqandi, al-Lamishi, al-Mandi, they all agree amongst the Hanafi fuqaha that the aql has a role to play in accepting narrations. In terms of other scholars, let's mention a few others. A famous scholar to mention would be Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, rahmatullah, great Shafi scholar, great Hadith scholar, great scholar of commentaries on Hadith as well. He says in his Nukat, which is a book in commentary of Ibn Salah's Muqaddimah Ibn Salah, which is a book on hadith narration. He has a commentary on it called An-Nukat of Ibn Hajar, which are just notes really. He says in this, Rahmatullah alayh, the Usuliyun, the people of Usul, the ones who bring the foundational principles, theories of law, theories of not just the law, but also the principles of our religion in terms of faith and in terms of practice. جعل الأصوليون من دلائل الوضع أن يخالف الأقل ولا يقبل تأويلا. Right? So one of the signs of wada' here, meaning forgery of hadith, is that it is in contradiction to the aql. يخالف, conflicts with the aql, and doesn't accept ولا يقبل تأويلا, again doesn't accept an interpretation. لأنه لا يجوز, look what the Imam says, لأن Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, لأنه لا يجوز أن يرد الشرع بما ينافي مقتضى العقل, because it's not possible. يجوز here means intellectually possible, rationally possible. It's not possible that the shara', the law of Allah, the sharia, the Islam, could come with something which contradicts rational. So, one point to make here is all scholars in the past thought rationally. There was no irrational thought. It was like, it's in the Quran, we're accepting it. We don't care what rational thought says. We don't care that 1 + 1 = 2. It can be 3. No, we're not irrational. We're not ridiculously going to behave like that. And that's how the scholars built our understanding of this religion, this life, our worldview, and how things work. Ibn Jawzi, mentioned earlier, who's a Hanafi scholar, his كل حديث رأيته يخالف المعقول أو يناقض الأصول فاعلم أنه موضوع فلا تتكلف اعتباره. Every hadith that you see which contradicts the intellect or contradicts the usul, the foundation principles, then know it is a forgery, and don't busy yourself with thinking about it or worrying yourself with such a thing, right? Again, if it has an interpretation, we can accept it. The interpretation is what we look into. So this is a very, very important principle that I think we need to understand. So a hadith is actually mentioned here in Ibn Adi in his Kamil and Bayhaqi in Asma' wa Sifat. Obviously this hadith is rejected. Why? Because it goes against the intellect. What's the hadith? It's a hadith of, not of the Prophet, we call it hadith now. It's a forgery. So it's a hadith of Abi Muhazzim. Let's just mention the person who rated it. He says, Inna Allah khalaqa al-faras. Surely Allah created the horse. فأجراها, he made it run. فأرقت, so it sweated, right? ثم خلق نفسه منها, then he created the horse from the body of the horse, the reality of the horse, from the sweat of the horse. Wait a minute. It says in the beginning of the Allah created the horse. What? A non-physical being, because he created it afterwards from its sweat. Where did the sweat come from? So it's illogical that you could create something, it could sweat, and then you created it from the sweat. Wait a minute, what was the thing before? Right? Wasn't that the horse first? So this is logical. The word this hadith is worded, it's like it's like the chicken and egg, which came first? The animal, the sweat, and then the animal again. What's going on here? So chicken and egg scenario, that's illogical. That is rationally illogical to say that this chicken came from that egg and that egg came from that chicken. The father produced the son, but the son produced the father. Right? No, it's not the case. It's illogical, and therefore this is rejected. So when it's not hadith, it's a forgery. It's a statement that we can't accept in our religion, and this is a very important point that we have to understand as part of our understanding of Islam and the religion of Islam. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. And that more or less concludes the points I wanted to make. I wanted to finish with this point and finish with answering the question on which is superior, the aql or the naql. Aql means the intellect, naql means the naql means the transmission of the text themselves, right? So how does that work, right? So what we can say as a conclusion is that primarily the aql, the intellect, takes precedence, and it takes us to revelation. And through our understanding, our research, our intellect, rational capabilities, we come to realize there's a truth behind reports, revelation, and so forth. So once we accept that, like I said earlier, we have to accept the whole package. We can't pick and choose what to accept. Once we accept that, we have to accept the whole thing. Now, once we've accepted the whole thing, which is revelation, the text of Islam, we can't then decide to say, okay, that one I don't understand, that one I don't understand, that doesn't come into it. Let's look at it from a rational perspective. Is it against the simple logic, rational thought, basic principles of human rationale? Yes, it is. Well, it's not part of our religion then. So hence you won't find any of the Quran being like that. Alhamdulillah. It's not like that. Alhamdulillah. Brilliant, right? And like I said, those things which are apparently the case, remember there's one actually thing I mentioned, forgot to say, which is that if there's an interpretation which has to be given in certain circumstances throughout the Quran, then that's fine. We can take it on the interpretation, because that's a perfectly fine way of speaking. Language actually. So when we say sound interpretation, we mean like that's actually how metaphorical speech is. That's how the Arabs spoke. That's how language is. If it's something we're just making up as we go along to justify the revelation or the narration, that's not how it works. We can't just carry on justifying by making up new, proverbs and metaphors and this kind of thing, right? There's got to be something that is based on some solid foundation, and if it is, then fine. It's not literal, it's metaphorical, and that's a whole different topic within itself. So then we're left with those that do genuinely go against the intellect, have no rational or sound interpretation. That therefore is something we don't accept. And yes, the role of the aql does take precedence, but here's the thing, and here's the final point that I'll leave you with, inshallah ta'ala, and that is that if we don't understand something, it doesn't mean we reject it. When I say we don't understand, I mean you and I in our personal intellectual capabilities. I don't mean overall in the science of logic and rationale and scientific thought, etc. Whatever terminology you want to use for that, logical thought, etc. I mean here that you as an individual, myself as an individual, us as human beings, when we just think ourselves, because we are prone to mistakes in the way we process information. We are, as human beings, susceptible to thinking incorrectly. Even our sources of information can be mistaken. I'll give you one example. If you look at something in water, it looks different. Your eyes can deceive you, as we all know, and you can mistakenly see things that are not there. Sometimes you hear things you may have misheard. Yes. So we have to look at ourselves when we don't understand something. As long as it does not go against the intellect and sound rational thought, then we as Muslims should not deny that, and we should look at what it means. It might have a metaphorical meaning, it might be literal. Sometimes we leave it and we surrender to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as Imam Ghazali says, Imam Tahawi says, we do not delve into such matters bi ara'ina, with our opinions, because our opinions are based on our limited knowledge and understanding, but rather we leave those things which are beyond our human capability and intellectual understanding. We leave them to Allah. We surrender. There's a level of surrender, and hence, again, the revelation takes precedence here. We just have to accept the revelation and say, Allah knows best. It's not illogical, but at the same time, I don't know what it is. I surrender to Allah Almighty and His revelation. And one of the things we learn from our teachers, which I will leave you with, and I hope you act upon this, and Imam Ghazali actually mentions it in his Aqidah works. So Imam Ghazali actually picked up on this point because he was a bit later than some of the earlier scholars. He says, we believe in Allah and what comes from Allah, ala muradillah, as Allah intended it. Right? So often we hear the fact that I believe in God, I believe in the Quran, and then we start making our interpretations. No, I believe in Allah and His statements in the way He intended them, because sometimes they do have ambiguous statements, do have difficult to understand statements. I believe in what the Prophet ﷺ said, and in the manner, in the intention, in the meaning that he ﷺ intended, not in the one I think or the one I interpret or one I want, and then make Islam a religion of my concoction and my viewpoint, which is what many groups have done. But rather, we have to realize the limit of the intellect, and we have to surrender and accept that it has a meaning, it's going to be applicable in some way, and Allah knows best. Thank you for being a part of today's webinar. Hope you benefited from this presentation, and hopefully see you again for more webinars with Mindpick. Thank you to the team at Isnad who've put this together. Thank you for viewing, and for those viewing later on the live stream, on the recording. Sorry. Assalamu alaikum to all of you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi